Morning. I'm Steve Lentini, and Lord and Lentini is the work I do, the name of my company. And a big part of what I do is about self observation. I'm observing my crazy mind wants to look at my wife and say, why is your phone volume up so that my YouTube channel people can listen to it? So, but I'm not upset. I'm accepting the moment. That's how we can train our mind to be happy. So I'm coaching people on self observation, and it's been part of our culture, a very small percentage of our culture for thousands of years. The Kabbalah talked about it, the Kabbalists over 4,000 years ago. And then fast forward to modern times, the people that talked about self observation today is Eckhart Tolle, currently doing that, Deepak Chopra. And then some of the sages in my book, Sage Advice. Honey, will you get me my book? It's in my briefcase, Sage Advice. In my book, Sage Advice, Rainer Maria Rilke in the 1800s was talking about happiness. And he was talking about the voice in our head. And he called it the little hooligan. I call it the acorn brain. Now, if you're wondering why I'm looking like this is one of my clients, Noonan Brothers Painting in New Hampshire. If you need commercial painting, you got to do it. I happen to be a New York Yankee fan, and I still love the Boston Red Sox. Not when we play head to head, because my mother and father, three brothers and a sister, were Yankee fans in our household. And so there were three of us that became Yankee fans. So there was, we were outnumbered 6 against 3. And we figured out how to coexist. And there was never a fight or an argument over the Red Sox or the Yankees. And I was glad when they finally beat the Yankees in 2004, only disappointed that my mother didn't wait around long enough to see it. She passed in January 2004. But she would have been 95 that July. So she lived a long life. And one of the things I noticed about my mother was her acceptance of what was. She went with what was. And that's embracing life as it is. So in the book Sage Advice, there's a lot, this is available on Amazon. There's a lot of sages that have some tremendous advice about being present. Here is something from Helen Wilmans, who lived 1831 to 1907. Thought is the healer. Thought educated in the knowledge of that universal truth, all is good, or all is life, becomes a power that cannot be resisted by the negative thought of the negative individual. So I'm not going to read from the whole book and drive you all crazy, but I can tell you that self-observation is something that George Ivanovich Gurdjieff talked about in the late 1800s to early 1900s. I think he died in 44. And P.D. Ouspensky, who wrote the book, The Possible Evolution of the Psychology of Man. Gurdjieff has many books. Views from the Real World is a great book. You can find it on eBay. There's a lot of people selling it. Views from the Real World are actually a collection of his thoughts as remembered by students. So if that reminds you of anything, like people have written about Socrates or Plato or the Bible or the Quran or any of the holy books, the Torah, they're stories written by people that had a recollection of the events and what those sages talked about, or the prophets. So self-observation is witnessing your triggers. Who triggers you and what triggers you? And just notice. The fascinating thing about it leading to happiness is all you have to do is notice it. Even, and I've talked about this before, in the middle of an explosion where you're reacting to your trigger, right? If you're someone who fishes or knows about fishing, just picture a lure or some bait floating in the water and a fish grabs it, right? That's the same as our thoughts. There's certain things that will hook you. And in the middle of it, you can just notice it. And what you'll notice over time is you will choose other thoughts. You'll choose another path. And we can't do that. And most of the general population cannot do that. And I'm not making them wrong. Understand that. Most of the general population can't do it because we're not trained to not believe our thinking. Like Rainer Maria Rilke said, right? Will you let that little hooligan run you, or will you run it? And I've been teaching this for a long time, and I learned about it maybe 30 years ago. I'm embarrassed to say that at 50, I really started to get it. I'm 71 now, or I'll be 71 this year, but I can tell you that it's a journey. It's not a destination. And if anyone tells you they found the way to do this, run away. Please run away from them. There's your way. It's a journey. There's no destination. In the middle of this work, I can find that little voice running me. But as I catch it and notice it, I'm developing a level of thinking above my thinking. Here, let me take my Yankee hat off, right? So I'm developing a level of thinking above my thinking. That's all there is to do. And you can practice gratitude. You can say gratitude. You can write about being grateful and what you're grateful for. You can think about what you're grateful for every day. You could have a gratitude partner or calls with people that would hold you accountable to saying things that are you're grateful for. But as you develop a gratitude practice, sometimes that doesn't work until you add self-observation. And when you notice that you're getting tense in your body, anywhere, shoulders, neck, head, that's where it happens to me a lot. And then certain things, I notice a tightening in my chest. That's an indicator that something's hooked you. And if you breathe, some of the masters talk about breathing, picture yourself breathing in through the navel and then out through the navel, and relax your body. You'll begin to additionally notice those triggers. So they're not just thoughts, of which, by the way, reality comes into our mind at 2,000 bits per second. No, 2 million bits per second. That was my acorn brain, what I call the small-minded thinker, right? The little hooligan. For me, it's the acorn brain. And in other areas, I call it something else, but you can email me or chat me here and I'll type in what I call it. As I notice it, and I notice the tension rising anywhere in my body, I know I'm hooked. And because it isn't always an outward vocal reaction, it could be thoughts that make me less than someone, or thoughts. How about this? Have you ever had thoughts of where all of a sudden your brain reminds you of something you did that was foolish, or you were humiliated or embarrassed or hurt someone from kindergarten on? 2 weeks ago, a week ago, at a conference. It doesn't matter. You will notice, as you begin to notice, your brain has an advantage over you. Your mind has an advantage. You want to know what it is? I'll share it. I won't leave you in suspense. What it is, the advantage your mind has over you, it knows every one of your thoughts, mistakes, faults, humiliations, embarrassments, angry outbursts, messy things. And over time, as you begin this self-observation, what I want you to consider is forgiving yourself and embracing yourself, that there is no perfect human. In fact, if you think you're the perfect human, that's something to work on. That would be one of the flaws that self-observation brings to the forefront as you separate them from a bodily reaction or a verbal reaction, and you just breathe and accept them. That's all you have to do. Now, you can go spend thousands of dollars with gurus and classes and weekend classes and fire walks. I advise you to do so if that's in your heart to do. I'm suggesting you prove to yourself that self-observation can help you immensely finally accept yourself as you are. Embrace life as it is. And then you'll find actually moments of gratitude flowing through you. There's no work to do. It flows through you as you become more accepting of who you are. Depression and anger are actually the places where we haven't embraced ourselves. And as I like to say often, it's not a destination, but you'll find larger and larger gaps between happiness with you as you are, right? I'm looking outside here on vacation in Lake George, right? The beauty of it all. And how grateful I am to be here and to be able to share this work, which I know is my calling. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, I knew nothing about him. I was living in Newburyport and bought a book at a tag sale for 50 cents. The possible evolution of the possible psychology of the evolution of man by P.D. Ouspensky. All right. I still have the paperback. I wish I had it with me. I'd show you the cover. Honey, would you get me real views, the views from the real world by Gurdjieff students? This is a book that you can find on eBay. Views of the Real World. And these are recollections of his talks. So I knew nothing of Gurdjieff. And I was with someone who was sharing their life story with me one day, who it just seemed like they had a lot of anxiety. And I said, does it seem like your life is a nightmare that you're trying to wake up from? And this person said, yeah, it does. It does. I'm struggling to wake up from it. And so I wrote down, it takes a force of will. I said, do you mind if I write something down? It's a thought that just came to me. They said no. So I wrote it down on a cocktail napkin. It takes a force of will to wake oneself up in one's lifetime. A few weeks later, I was reading something by a spiritual writer, David something or other. I forget his name. I promised to get that. I'm going to do that research in the next few weeks because it happened over 20 years ago. And I'm reading this guy's book, and he says, George Ivanovich Gurdjieff once said that most men, I'll say people, most people are in a sleeping man, bourgeoisie, sleeping man state. And it takes a force of will to wake oneself up in one's lifetime. I thought, wait, I wrote that second half. It just came to me. I got to go find who this Gurdjieff is. And I was living in Salem, Massachusetts at the time. I could walk to the Salem Public Library. I would have driven. There was nothing by Gurdjieff, about Gurdjieff in it back then, by the way. It was still a card file library. They still had the cards. You had to pull out these little drawers, big cabinets, pull out the drawer. Nothing. So I asked the library clerk, is there something about philosophers? Oh, second floor. There's research volumes, which I also had that thought. I bet you there's research volumes. So I asked, yes, second floor. She directed me to where they were. She said there's 4 shelves you'll see the volumes. They're all above one another. Something said the green volumes to me. And I pulled out the book that would have the G in it for Gurdjieff. And another book was stuffed in there. And it fell to the floor. I thought to myself, if that's about Gurdjieff, I'll just, well, you can figure. I don't want to be profane here. All right, forget it. I'll just shit, is what I said to myself. But I still looked in the green volume for Gurdjieff, nothing about Gurdjieff. And some people pronounce it Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff, okay. Corn brain. Trying to enroll me. Make me wrong. So I pick up the book on the floor, and wouldn't you guess, it was a book by a student. And it didn't have Gurdjieff on the cover. It didn't have Gurdjieff anywhere until on the front or the back until I opened the book. And this person talked about their own recollections. It wasn't this book, The Views from the Real World, because other people had done this collection in the 70s. And that book wasn't there in that particular library. Views from the Real World. And in the book, that person talked about Gurdjieff and P.D. Ouspensky and mentioned the book I had a few weeks earlier for 50 cents because I was looking at a whole table of lots of books. There were hundreds of books there on the ground, on the table, all over the place. They had some little bookcases at this tag sale. And that book said something to me, an intuition. That's why I paid 50 cents for it. And when I got it home, by the way, 2 weeks before I discovered this Gurdjieff thing, it didn't appeal to me. The Psychology, the Possible Evolution of a Man by P.D. Ouspensky. I was like, nah. When I read about Gurdjieff and his relationship with P.D. Ouspensky and how the two of them had this dynamic in and out of each other's lives, and I read the philosophy of Gurdjieff about what he called the different eyes within ourselves and how we can learn to manage our triggers and not become the automatic robot, mechanical person. And then I could understand the Ouspensky work. He talked about the fourth way, and Gurdjieff talked about this. The thought is running us and me, and we become mechanical, robotic. We're not in the moment, as Eckhart Tolle talks. When we fight life, life fights us. And that's where I was. I was fighting life. I was tied into the value of everything from the outside making me valuable as a person. My value was coming from outside things. I was going to be the #1 licensee of this national sales training program. And I was pushing. I was going to win. I was fighting life and I was going to win. And when I surrendered, and you can listen to my other videos about the massive surrender that I had it'll be 21 years on November 18th, or you can read it in any of my books. I wrote Wake Up, Jump Into Your Life in 2002 and 3 when I realized that as a child, my nightmares were a gift because I realized and recognized it took a force of will to wake up from those nightmares. And that flashed into my head when I was talking to the person that I mentioned earlier in this video, that she was living a nightmare. And there was no force of will available in her mind to break that at the time. That's the gift in feeling stuck. That's life itself urging us to wake up, to take the control of your thoughts, that you don't have to believe them. And what you can simply do is begin to notice them. That's all you have to do. And you'll make new choices. Now, you prove this to yourself as you notice your triggers and breathe through them. And like I said, you can be in the middle of a trigger and breathe through them. You'll find yourself making new choices and then feeling gratitude. Now, is it also helpful to think about things every night before you close your eyes about what you're grateful for that day. Or you were grateful in it. You might not be grateful for it yet because you're in the discovery of something that occurred that really bothered you. You can be grateful in it, and you'll get to where you'll be grateful for it. Just don't rush it. You'll see the connection that, as Christ said, everything works together for good. As Muhammad said, what reaches you is meant for you. What misses wasn't. And I'm paraphrasing that. Let me take a second, if you don't mind. Let me find where I wrote about that so that you can get the exact quote. Page 91. If you've got the book, go to page 91. If you don't have the book, go buy one. If you want a gift, send me your address. I'll send you one. How's that for living in America? Here we go. Here's something that I can preface right before I go to the main quote. Muhammad said, the strongest among you is the one who controls his anger. When a thing disturbs the peace of your heart, give it up. There is a polish for everything that takes away rust, and the polish for the heart is the remembrance of Allah or God or whatever you call it. Here's the quote that I love. I love all his quotes, but I love all the different people that I selected in this book, and I'm getting ready to do the next one sometime next year, because right now I'm working on In Plain Sight. Learn to see what most people miss and embrace life as it is. And by the way, there's probably only 2% of the population that get there's a way to manage your thoughts. By the way, 2 million bits per second. I remember that thought process. Reach ours in reality. They reach us 2 million bits per second. What our brain can process is 2,000. 1%. Which 1% are you going to pick? So here's what Muhammad said. What has reached you was never meant to miss you. And what has missed you was never meant to reach you. I'll read it again. What has reached you was never meant to miss you. And what has missed you was never meant to reach you. So what's reached you, to be grateful for it, and to spend some time not reacting, not being sad or depressed, but to look for the gift. Find the gift in it. And if you're longing for something that has yet to reach you, it wasn't meant to reach you. So I hope this helps. And I'm grateful that you've spent some time with me. And I'm grateful that all my subscribers, I'll be announcing some classes, some Zoom classes, YouTube classes that you can join for people that subscribe. And it's my calling to help people wake up in life. Wake Up, Jump Into Your Life is available. I'm also updating that. It'll be out in 2024, a new version of Wake Up, Jump Into Your Life. And it isn't the money. I could care less about the money. I came here with none. I'm leaving with none. And what I learned is life is best lived from the inside out. As I changed from the inside and gave up and left behind everything from the outside, because it doesn't validate us. We go searching for titles and writing books, letters after the name, educating our children to become lawyers and doctors and this and that, and add some letters to your name. That doesn't make anyone an expert, because most of them, not all, because I don't like making anyone wrong generally, but I can say most people who think they're the smartest, that's the problem. They're the expert. And we can see so many of them today, right? All kinds of people making others wrong so they can be right. They forget. What if their answers are wrong? They're not questioning themselves. They're the expert. I'm not the expert. You are not the expert. What you are is the wondrous owner of a soul. Actually, the soul is the wondrous owner of a body. But what's going to run you? Some scientists think that consciousness ends when the brain dies. I can tell you that's not true. I know for a fact, November 18th, 2002, go look it up. Look up my experience. Go back to some of the YouTube. You'll find out what I learned for myself. So prove some things to yourself. Just sit with observing where you're triggered and maybe even the middle of a trigger today. Even if it's just sitting and you become sad or depressed, or you currently think you're sad and depressed, that's your thinker telling you that, because it's tying your value to those events that mean nothing. So what? Whatever you think happened, whatever you think your parents did to you, your neighbors, your boss, your spouse, your mate, those that left you. Remember, what misses you was never meant to reach you. What reached you was meant to. There's a lesson and a gift for those that embrace life as it is. Learn to begin that self-observation journey and developing a level of thinking above their thinking by just noticing. Siddhartha, who eventually was named the Buddha or identified as the Buddha, was told as a child they thought he was the Buddha, the future Buddha, the next Buddha. And he went on a tremendous journey, study, sages. He was driving himself crazy with finding how to be perfect. And he fell exhausted under a tree. And the picture of him laughing under that tree was him embracing himself, flaws and all. Just embracing life as it was. And that's when he became the Buddha. You have to prove these concepts to yourself. Be gentle and loving with yourself. Get to the place where you can laugh like the Buddha under the tree. If you have any questions for me, you can email me, steve@stevelentini.com, steve@stevelentini. I'll spell it, Steve@Steve Lentini, L as in Linda, E-N as in Nancy, T as in Tom, I-N-I.com. If you'd like to be a guest with me, glad to have you. You want to challenge me? Glad to have you. I like my answers questioned. Thanks.